Before starting the story, write in the comments section which country you belong to. The kingdom of Camelot lay beneath a sky of soft gold, morning sunlight spilling over stone towers and the green fields surrounding the castle. Birds sang gently in the gardens, and the distant sound of a river flowing reminded everyone that the world beyond the walls continued quietly. Within the castle, preparations were underway for the grand tournament, where knights from all corners of the land would ride and show their courage, skill, and honor. But amid the excitement, a different story quietly began to take shape, one that would stir hearts in ways no tournament could. Lancelot, a knight of the Round Table, rode through the castle gates on his strong black steed. His armor shone in the sunlight, polished to perfection, yet his eyes carried a seriousness that often went unnoticed by the common folk. He was known as the bravest and most skilled of Arthur's knights, a hero in battle. But in the quiet corners of Camelot, Lancelot held a secret longing that no sword or shield could satisfy. He sought not only honor in tournaments, but a deeper connection, a feeling that eluded him even in victory. Princess Guinevere moved through the halls of Camelot gracefully. Her heart often wandered beyond the walls that confined her royal life. She had beauty, intelligence, and a kind spirit that drew many to her. Yet she often felt alone amid the endless ceremonies, feasts, and formalities. Guinevere longed for someone who could understand her, someone who saw her as more than just a princess. She found joy in small things, a quiet garden, the sound of laughter, or the calm of a library filled with scrolls and books. But there were moments when even these small comforts felt hollow without someone to share them. The first time their paths crossed was unremarkable to the world outside, yet monumental for their hearts. Lancelot had been asked to present himself at the court for the upcoming tournament, and Guinevere, curious and gentle, observed him from the gallery as he entered the hall. The moment their eyes met, there was a subtle spark, a recognition neither could explain. Lancelot's gaze lingered just a second too long, and Guinevere's heart skipped in a way she had never felt before. It was as though they had seen each other in dreams long before meeting in the waking world. The days that followed were filled with formalities and preparations. Lancelot practiced tirelessly in the courtyard, his sword slicing through the air with precision. Yet when he caught glimpses of Guinevere in the windows or heard her voice in the hallways, his thoughts would drift and his swordplay would falter for the briefest moment. Guinevere, in turn, found herself drawn to the courtyard where Lancelot trained. She would watch quietly, pretending to admire the horses or the banners, but her eyes always returned to the knight whose skill seemed as endless as his quiet courage. It was during one such afternoon, with the sun dipping toward the horizon, that a chance encounter brought them together in the castle gardens. Lancelot had dismounted and walked toward a fountain, lost in thought, while Guinevere tended to the roses nearby. Neither expected to speak, but the air between them held a quiet invitation. "Good evening, my lady," Lancelot said, bowing slightly. His voice carried both respect and an unspoken warmth. "Good evening, Sir Lancelot," Guinevere replied softly, a small smile touching her lips. Her voice was calm, but her heart fluttered with excitement she could hardly contain. "The gardens seem especially beautiful at this hour." "They do," Lancelot agreed, though his eyes never left hers. "But I must confess, I think their beauty pales beside yours." Guinevere felt a gentle heat rise to her cheeks, though she kept her composure. There was a sincerity in his words, a depth that went beyond mere courtesy. She sensed that Lancelot saw her not as a princess bound by her title, but as a person, and that understanding touched her deeply. They walked together through the quiet paths, exchanging stories of distant lands, of tournaments, and of childhood memories, small things that revealed the hearts behind their public faces. Yet, even in these quiet moments, both knew the world outside their shared steps demanded caution. Lancelot was a knight sworn to serve King Arthur, and Guinevere, though compassionate and curious, had duties as queen that could never be ignored. Still, there was a gentle tension in every glance, a silent longing in every pause, as if their souls recognized each other's presence more clearly than their own words could express. The first part of their story ended not with grand declarations, but with a quiet understanding. As twilight fell over Camelot, Lancelot and Guinevere parted ways, each carrying a thought that would not leave them. The knight returned to his quarters and the princess to her chambers, yet neither could forget the simple touch of a shared glance, the sound of laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves, or the strange comforting certainty that they had found someone extraordinary in one another. And so began the delicate, tender thread of connection between Lancelot and Guinevere, a thread that promised joy, longing, and the quiet ache of hearts learning to recognize a love that could neither be ignored nor fully expressed yet. The weeks that followed their first meeting in the gardens carried a rhythm both familiar and fragile. Camelot, with all its grandeur, felt both alive and suffocating to Guinevere. She moved through her duties with grace, attending ceremonies, meeting dignitaries, and observing the knights as they trained. Yet her mind often wandered to Lancelot. She had never met someone who stirred her heart so quietly, and yet so profoundly. Someone whose presence lingered like a soft melody she could not forget. Lancelot, too, felt the weight of his growing affection. In the tournament courtyard, in the council halls, or even in the quiet of the armory, thoughts of Guinevere slipped into his mind unbidden. He found himself imagining conversations that might never occur, stolen moments that the world would never allow. He knew the dangers that affection carried, his honor, his duty to King Arthur, and the expectations of Camelot itself, but his heart refused to heed caution. It was during a late evening, when the castle was draped in moonlight and the air carried the faint scent of autumn leaves, that Lancelot and Guinevere found themselves alone once more. The castle corridors were quiet, the usual bustle replaced by a soft, almost magical stillness. Guinevere had wandered to the library, drawn by the comfort of old books and the solitude they offered. Lancelot, by chance or perhaps by instinct, had taken the same path, seeking a place to think and unwind after a long day of training. "Lady Guinevere," Sir Lancelot said, stepping into the doorway where she stood, brushing dust from the shelves. His voice was calm, yet the warmth in it made her heart lift. "I did not expect to find you here." "And I did not expect to see you either, Sir Lancelot," Guinevere replied, her voice carrying the lightest of smiles. She turned toward him fully, meeting his gaze. There was an unspoken understanding in their eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the feelings they had been trying to suppress. The library is peaceful in the evenings. Sometimes one needs peace more than company. "I agree," Lancelot said softly, taking a step closer. "Yet I find that certain company makes the peace even more profound." His words were gentle, careful not to overstep, but they held a truth that resonated in the quiet air. They moved among the shelves together, discussing stories of distant lands, tales of knights and kings, and the wisdom hidden in the pages of old scrolls. Their conversation was easy, natural, as if they had known each other far longer than the brief weeks they had spent in Camelot. Every glance, every pause, carried a weight beyond words, a weight of longing, admiration, and a quiet, growing affection. But even in these moments of closeness, reality remained an unspoken boundary. Guinevere knew her role as queen, and the eyes of Camelot were ever watchful. Lancelot, for all his courage, understood the chains of loyalty and honor that bound him to the king. They both moved carefully, their affection growing in silence, nurtured in stolen glances and fleeting conversations, rather than bold declarations. Days turned into weeks, and the tournament finally arrived. A spectacle of color, sound, and celebration. Knights from far and wide displayed their skill, courage, and strategy, riding into the lists with determination, their lances aimed true, their hearts filled with both pride and fear. Lancelot's prowess was unmatched, his strength and skill admired by all, yet his eyes often sought the familiar gaze of Guinevere among the crowd. Her presence gave him a sense of calm he had never known in battle, a quiet assurance that no matter the outcome, there was a heart in the world that beat in rhythm with his own. Guinevere, sitting in the royal box, felt the tension of every joust as if it were her own. She admired the knights, their courage and skill, yet her thoughts returned repeatedly to Lancelot. Every move he made, every maneuver of his horse drew her attention, not just as a spectator, but as someone who felt a deeper connection. She cheered quietly when he succeeded, her hands pressed to her chest in both pride and relief, feeling an emotional bond that transcended the public spectacle. After the tournament, Camelot celebrated with a feast. Music and laughter filled the great hall, yet amid the festivities, Lancelot and Guinevere found themselves once more drawn together. They lingered near the gardens, away from the noise, enjoying a quiet moment under the stars. The night was cool, and the sky stretched endlessly above them, filled with countless points of light that seemed to mirror the unspoken feelings between them. "Sir Lancelot," Guinevere said, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you ever feel as though the world expects too much from us? That we are bound by duty so tightly that we cannot breathe freely?" Lancelot looked at her, his eyes reflecting both the moonlight and the depth of understanding he felt. "Every day, my lady. And yet, there are moments like this, rare and fleeting, when one can breathe, when one can simply be." He hesitated, searching for words that could express the quiet ache in his heart. "And I am grateful for these moments, for your presence, which brings a kind of peace I cannot find elsewhere." Guinevere reached out briefly, her hand brushing against his. The contact was fleeting, a whisper of connection, yet it spoke volumes. Neither needed to say more. In that silent exchange, hearts were laid bare, and a tender emotional bond deepened, yet they both understood it must remain unspoken in the eyes of the world. And so the quiet bloom of affection grew, fragile yet beautiful. Their connection existed in glances, in small touches, in conversations that carried layers of meaning beneath the surface. Both Lancelot and Guinevere knew that the path ahead would not be easy, that the world demanded loyalty and honor, yet they could not deny the growing warmth in their hearts, a warmth that would continue to shape their lives even as challenges and heartbreaks awaited them on the horizon. As the weeks passed, Camelot seemed brighter to some and heavier to others. The warmth of spring had given way to early summer, and the kingdom thrummed with life, festivals, and the steady rhythm of courtly duties. Yet beneath the polished surface of feasts and tournaments, a quiet tension began to take hold, a tension that neither Lancelot nor Guinevere could fully escape. Though their hearts had grown closer in secret, the world around them remained vigilant. Whispers traveled through the halls of Camelot like shadows at dusk, knights and ladies, servants and courtiers, all observing with cautious eyes. Lancelot's bravery and skill drew admiration, but admiration could easily turn to suspicion when accompanied by the frequent, subtle glances he exchanged with the queen. Guinevere, for her part, felt the weight of these silent judgments pressing upon her. She knew her reputation, her honor, and her duty were under constant scrutiny. Yet in the quiet corners of her heart, she longed for more than what protocol allowed. It was during a council meeting with King Arthur that the tension became unmistakable. Lancelot knelt before the king, presenting his report from the northern patrols. His words were careful, precise, yet Arthur's eyes, sharp as ever, seemed to notice the way Lancelot's gaze lingered on Guinevere, who sat nearby with her hands folded in her lap. Though Arthur was wise and just, he could not miss the subtle undercurrent between knight and queen. "Lancelot," Arthur said, his voice calm but firm, "your courage in the north is commendable. You serve Camelot with loyalty, and the realm owes you gratitude. But remember, loyalty is not only to the battlefield, it is to the king, the queen, and the order we uphold." Lancelot bowed, the weight of the king's words pressing upon him. "I understand, my lord. My duty is my life, and I will honor it always." Guinevere's heart ached at the reminder of boundaries she could not ignore. She longed to speak freely, to express the emotions that swelled inside her, yet the walls of propriety and respect held her back. She smiled politely, nodding to Arthur, but inside her thoughts were restless. In the days that followed, Lancelot found solace only in fleeting moments, a quiet word in the gardens, a shared smile across the courtyard, or a brief pause near the fountain where they had first met. These moments were enough to sustain him, though he knew they were fragile, like glass teetering on the edge of shattering. Yet even the strongest hearts cannot remain untouched by the pull of desire and circumstance. One evening, while the sun sank low over Camelot, Guinevere walked alone through the castle corridors. Her mind was heavy with the weight of duties, the unspoken longing for Lancelot, and the constant awareness that their hearts walked a narrow path between love and peril. Lancelot appeared quietly, as if drawn by some unseen force, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. "My lady," he said softly, "I hope I do not intrude." "Never, Sir Lancelot," Guinevere replied, her voice trembling with emotion she could not fully contain. I merely needed to walk and think." They strolled together through the corridors, the fading light casting long shadows on the stone walls. For a while, they spoke of trivial things, books they had read, tales of distant lands, and memories of childhood joys. But beneath the surface, their hearts spoke volumes. Finally, Guinevere paused, resting her hand lightly against the cold stone. "Lancelot, I cannot deny what I feel, yet I fear what may come if these feelings are known." Lancelot's eyes softened, reflecting a mixture of longing and sorrow. "I feel the same, my lady. Every moment I spend near you is both a blessing and a torment. I am torn between duty to Camelot and this." He gestured toward his heart. "I cannot ignore it, though I know the risks we take with every stolen glance, every quiet word." A silence fell between them, heavy and full of unspoken truths. It was a silence that both comforted and tormented, a silence that held the promise of love and the threat of heartbreak. Days later, news arrived from a neighboring kingdom. A rival lord challenged Camelot, demanding tribute and threatening war. The court was thrown into urgency, and Lancelot, as ever, prepared to ride into danger. Guinevere, though fearful for his safety, remained composed in her role as queen. Yet when they met in the gardens for a brief farewell, the tension between duty and desire became almost unbearable. "Promise me you will return," Guinevere said, her hands trembling slightly as she touched Lancelot's arm. "I promise, my lady. No matter what I face, my heart belongs to Camelot, and to you in ways I cannot explain." They parted with a long, lingering look, hearts heavy with longing and fear. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Camelot braced for conflict, while Guinevere felt the ache of absence in every corridor, every hall, and every quiet moment. She wrote letters she dared not send, whispered prayers she feared might not be unanswered, and clung to memories of their fleeting encounters. When Lancelot returned, wounded but victorious, Guinevere ran to meet him in the gardens. Relief washed over her, mingled with the quiet sorrow of what could not be spoken. They held hands briefly, hearts beating together in the cool evening air. Yet both knew the world demanded restraint. Their love remained a tender flame, hidden beneath duty, admiration, and the ever-present eyes of Camelot. Even in triumph, the shadow of longing and heartbreak lingered, a gentle ache that neither could escape. They had tasted a connection deeper than friendship, a bond stronger than loyalty alone, and yet the world continued to demand their silence. The story of Lancelot and Guinevere was no longer one of mere attraction. It had become a delicate dance of hearts, poised between desire and duty, between hope and the sorrow of what might never fully be realized. Time moves steadily in Camelot, as it always did, carrying with it the weight of seasons, duties, and decisions. Lancelot and Guinevere continued to navigate the delicate balance of their hidden affection. Their love, though deep and tender, existed in quiet gestures, a lingering glance across the hall, a word shared beneath the moonlight, or the simple comfort of one another's presence. They cherished these moments, knowing full well that the world outside their private glances demanded loyalty, honor, and restraint. Yet life, in its relentless way, has a way of testing hearts. Whispers continued to circulate in Camelot. Some saw the closeness between knight and queen and speculated, while others misinterpreted friendly gestures. Rumors, even if unproven, have a way of reaching the king's ears. Arthur, wise and just as he was, could not help but notice the subtle bond that had formed between his most trusted knight and the queen. It pained him, though he did not confront it immediately, for he knew love is complicated, and hearts often follow paths that duty cannot command. One crisp evening, under a sky painted in shades of orange and purple, Guinevere wandered the castle gardens alone. She felt a heaviness in her chest, a mixture of longing, worry, and the bitter taste of what she feared might come. Lancelot appeared quietly beside her, as if drawn by the same unspoken pull that had guided him countless times before. "My lady," he said softly, bowing his head, "you seem troubled." Guinevere let out a slow sigh, brushing a hand across the petals of a rose. "I fear, Sir Lancelot, that we cannot hold this closeness forever, that the duties we both cherish will demand more than our hearts can bear." Lancelot stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers with unwavering honesty. "I have felt this fear as well," he admitted. "But love does not vanish simply because it must remain unseen. It lives, quietly, even when we cannot act upon it." They stood together in silence for a long moment, hearts beating in unison, aware of the preciousness of their connection and the fragility of their situation. It was a bittersweet comfort to feel so profoundly, yet be forced to remain within invisible boundaries. Soon after, a grand council was held. Lancelot was called to lead a crucial campaign to secure the kingdom's borders, a mission that promised both honor and danger. Guinevere, though proud and supportive, felt the weight of impending separation in her chest. They met one final time before his departure, hidden in the quiet sanctuary of the gardens under a canopy of flowering trees. "Return to me safely," Guinevere whispered, her hands trembling slightly as she held his. "I will," Lancelot replied, his voice steady yet tender. "And know this, my lady, no matter the distance, no matter the trials we face, my heart remains with you." They parted, not with the heat of passion, but with the quiet intensity of souls who had found in each other a rare and profound connection. Lancelot rode away, leaving Guinevere standing among the roses, the petals brushing against her hands like the memory of his touch. Weeks passed, filled with letters, messages, and silent prayers. Guinevere carried on her royal duties with grace, though a quiet ache lingered within her. Every sunset reminded her of the times she had spent with Lancelot. Every night whispered the sound of his voice. She began to understand the bittersweet nature of love, that sometimes its truest power is not in possession or union, but in the quiet knowledge that hearts can connect deeply, even in separation. When Lancelot returned victorious, the reunion was simple yet profound. They met once more in the gardens, beneath the shade of the old trees where their connection had first bloomed. Words were few. Their eyes spoke volumes. They embraced not with urgency, but with a gentle reverence for the bond they shared. In that moment, the world felt still, and the years of longing, fear, and hope coalesced into a single truth. They had loved deeply and truly, even if the world could never fully allow it to flourish openly. Yet even in this quiet triumph, the reality of duty remained. Camelot required loyalty, the king required obedience, and the queen required discretion. Lancelot and Guinevere understood that love is not always about claiming it loudly or openly. It is sometimes about carrying it gently, protecting it, and letting it exist quietly in the heart. The story of Lancelot and Guinevere became one of enduring affection, of hearts intertwined even in secrecy, and of love that demanded patience, courage, and resilience. Though the world saw only knights, queens, and duties, the heart knows its own truth, that love in its most genuine form survives trials, distances, and heartbreak, becoming a quiet, unbroken thread that weaves through a lifetime. And so, beneath the towers of Camelot, in the quiet gardens where roses bloomed and leaves whispered in the wind, the love of Lancelot and Guinevere endured. It was not the love of bold declarations or grand gestures, but a love of quiet strength, tender devotion, and unspoken understanding, a love that shaped their lives, molded their choices, and remained unbroken even when the world demanded silence. In the end, their hearts knew what the world could not see, that some loves, though hidden, are eternal, and some connections, though tested by duty and time, remain unshaken. Lancelot and Guinevere had discovered the power of love that endures, quiet, steadfast, and endlessly profound. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and comment, and share and subscribe for more real-life love stories and emotional stories. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life.